We're in the middle of a journey across the Hillforts and Iron Age sites of Britain. I realise we haven't actually depicted this on a map yet. As we said, the Hillforts of Dorset and then the South Downs, they were really easy to order, but then there's a huge number of Hillforts drawing a box roughly between Oxford, Winchester, across the Shaftesbury and up to about the M4. Now we've caught a total of, just checking my notes here, 37. There's more, sure, but these are pretty much the most noteworthy. 2 episodes ago, we started up here at Beacon Hill in Hampshire and drew a squiggle that ended up dipping south into Wiltshire. Last time, we started zigzagging back up again and past Warminster into the western end of the Vale of Pewsey, where we're picking up things today as we also head through North Wiltshire and up into Oxfordshire. Since these county boundaries in specific are next to meaningless in an Iron Age context, I have no particular qualms about playing a bit fast and loose with them. And not to keep everyone waiting, title drop. We've been filming Hillforts for about 6 years now, and the filming for the different Hillforts in this section were done at such drastically different times, often as we were on our way to or from somewhere. So Blueburton Hill, this was a day in late July. We were actually on our way to Scotland on that occasion, and you can see the white fields of crops ready to be harvested. But then Perborough, this was on the 27th of December, just after seeing the family for Christmas, and my goodness, does the landscape on this day seem to perfectly embody the post-Christmas slump. Binknell Hill, that was early on a glorious August morning just this year. Apart from wanting to make the most of the sunshine that day, I was particularly keen to head there early because of the parking looking kind of sus. But then Alfred's Castle on a chilly but sunny February afternoon with snowdrops still looking gorgeous at the bases of the trees. So yes, quite a patchwork of the seasons, but great, okay. Well, first for this week, it's a bit of an understated one. Rybury. This sits on a ridgeline that from the south you can see coming for about a half hour before you even get there. We're in the Vale of Pewsey, just heading east from Devizes, and nowadays this is a pretty open landscape, rolling fields, screensaver hills and big skies. Access and or parking is also a bit of a mix. It took me about a half-hour trek on early morning with my shoes getting soaked with the dew as I jogged up a bridleway that seemed to have not seen a horse or human in over a year. So Rybury was a Neolithic causewayed enclosure, but that was overlaid with a later hill fort. And you can see the interior is somewhat bumpy and uneven. Let's just see if people have been paying attention to this series so far. If you think you know the answer to why that is, shout it at your device now. And yes, it's chalk mining in the 1800s. Dating for the site is overall rather loose. A trench cut in 1963 found numerous flint flakes, but not the actual worked flint itself. And within the next few years, subsequent excavations brought up some Neolithic sherds. Otherwise, the site has been labelled loosely as Bronze Age or Iron Age. The views up there really are something a bit magic. The ridge here suddenly shelves up over an otherwise flat agricultural plain below. And not too far to the east along this same ridgeline, Knap Hill is another causewayed enclosure, and in something of a first for this series, it seems that this is a causewayed enclosure that wasn't later transformed into a hill fort. I thought I'd seen reference to later Iron Age work here, but I can't find this now, and all the sources seem to describe this simply as a Neolithic causewayed enclosure. In fact, the first of its kind to be identified after excavations in 1908 and 1909. If you compare this to Windmill Hill, just above Avebury, that was excavated in 1920. Without going too deep into causewayed enclosures, they've been coming up repeatedly in this series, as many were later enhanced to become hill forts. They appear in Britain after about 3700 BC. They are delineating a space with a ditch, but with gaps or causeways across which allow people to enter. We're not entirely clear on their use, other than pretty much ruling out a military function, and a gathering place seems to be the best fit description. You can see just over from Knap Hill the somewhat wrecked Adam's Grave Long Barrow, also of a Neolithic date. We keep mentioning these series so far, and yes, if you haven't found the playlist yet, there's a whole lot more in there on hill forts. It was really exciting to have a chat with Miles Russell from the Durotriges project at Bournemouth University. We're expanding on both the Durotriges in Dorset, but also our unanswered questions about the Iron Age and the formation of hill forts. But even though we've had a pretty great year, we've had over 1,000 people join us, so thank you so much. But YouTube often just shows our stuff to a couple of hundred people, and that's it. You know, we're trying to avoid doing the obnoxious things that people often do for clicks, whether it's pivoting to exclusively posting on pyramids and Vikings, or AI garbage, or disingenuous titles, or anything, but trying to be an adult in the room usually results in your stuff being buried. For reference, each of these takes us about 20 or 30 hours to make, not least because we're having to check sources and try and make sure we're getting this right, as well as the editing and everything on top. It's a lot. So look, if nothing else, just to counter all the slop that's being shoveled in your direction, we're a channel that's always been determined to actually go to the places we're talking about, not leaning on stock libraries or a few grainy JPEGs, definitely not dribbling out AI garbage. But you'd be really helping us by hitting the bell so you get notifications when we make stuff, but also having a flick back through the channel. As well as all the Hillforts, we've crisscrossed across as many of the ancient places around Rome we could manage. Yeah, the platform didn't really see fit to show that to barely anyone. We've also done episodes all across Italy. I mean, Lake Garda was particularly special. And Spain, we've got more to add to that place once we're done with the Hillfort series. A lot around Greece, I mean, really a lot. So just have a flick back and that would be a massive help. And thank you. Well, next over, and the same morning I caught Ribery, Martinsell Hill. Like much of the ridgeline, from below you get a pretty impressive view of just how sharply the hill rises above the plains. Martinsell Hill actually forms a loose rectangle, though because of the trees, it's easiest to see the banks on the eastern side. And once at the top, the vantage it commands over the land below is breathtaking. The Wessex Hillfort survey was struggling to pick up many features, but they did point out that when comparable excavations had taken place at similar sites, post holes and houses had been detected in the archaeology, but they were just somewhat slight in construction. Can we just give it up for the Wessex Hillfort survey a moment? I've been citing this a lot for the last 3 episodes, and while major digs at Hillforts nowadays are somewhat rarer, the Wessex survey has run magnetometry over a large number of enclosures, and it's some of the most up-to-date analysis we have on many of these sites. Anyway, massive big ups Mark Corney, Andrew Payne and everyone else who worked on this. They made the comparison to both Walbury and Harting Beacon, which are both places we've seen on the series so far. These are larger enclosures, somewhat short on easily detectable archaeological features. The survey does suggest that occupation here may have been kind of brief. And of course, the trees were not in the way. One thing I was slightly remiss in not getting to, once you're at height with Martinsell, if you carry on along the ridgeline, you reach Giant's Grave. This is, I mean, I'd assume from the name it was a long barrow, but it's in fact, apparently, a small triangular promontory fort. I couldn't get over there. I think I had to get back in the car and get back to Bournemouth to go to work, if I'm remembering that day correctly, but I got a view of it off in the distance. Heading north from Martinsell, and I realised that because our focus is on Hillforts and the Iron Age, we are just gliding past some of the most significant Neolithic monuments anywhere in Britain. I mean, specifically all around Avebury. These are, of course, a job for another series, almost certainly a bumper episode all of their own. I only remark on them so that people don't somehow infer that we don't know that they are there. But to the north, and it's one of the most spectacular in the area, Barbury Castle. Now, first time I ever came to see this, we took the road to the east, and look, you see this enclosure? I mean, it's actually overlaying a Neolithic field system. Those jagged lines, yeah, that's the Berderop Down field system. And field systems surviving this prominently in the landscape are rare, so definitely worth appreciating. Anyway, I had seen pictures of Barbury in the past, but having not been there before, I saw this modestly prominent enclosure, got some footage, and great, there's Barbury done. It was only when I got home and rechecked the map and like, oh, whoops, Barbury is a short distance to the west. Look, it was early on in my Hillfort journey, okay? The next time I went, I didn't make the mistake of approaching from the east, but it was at the tail end of the day, and the light was going. I did manage to get it with some glorious colours behind. Third visit then. It was a sunny, if pretty windy day, but this time it finally managed to get a much more clear image, even if the clouds did keep changing the light. Barbury is a spectacular beast. The bivalate banks are impressively large. It looks like a third bank was started on the northern side, but possibly not completed. It can be entered from the east or west. There may have been an interned entrance to the west, but unfortunately, military activity up there around the Second World War disrupted the site and caused the entrances to be widened. This military activity also did expose some Iron Age features like pits. The picture from the survey in the centre suggests this was a highly developed Hillfort site with a lot of activity and features detected. It is therefore presumed to be one of the preeminent sites in the area, in contrast to a couple we'll get to in a moment, well, such as, not far away, Liddington. It turns out I've been saying this wrong all this time. I've been calling it Lidlington. This sits a short distance to the northeast. I don't actually have a shot of this, but you can see it very clearly when you pass it on the M4. This one is extremely pretty. I first caught this close to sundown, so the whole hill was lit up in bright orange. The next time was pretty early in the morning, with the August sunshine actually bleaching out my shots if I wasn't careful about angle. The ramparts here are well formed, and it sits just on a spur at the edge of the ridge, though this has a much less dense pattern of occupation to Barbary. Built in 4 phases with timber and turf ramparts in the late Bronze Age, and the latest work heightening the ramparts to anywhere from the latest Iron Age to potentially post-Roman. A fairly simple entrance to the east and a now blocked western entrance. It's worth noting that far from a smooth circle, which, absolutely a possibility in the space available, you do get that sometimes. Think Chiselbury from last time. The ramparts have been cut in angular segments. Rather than lazily looping around, they angle quite sharply in a new direction, and you'll see this on quite a lot of forts this time. There was a major excavation here in 1976 to investigate links to the Battle of Badon, a major siege that was mentioned by both Gildas and Bede between Britons and Saxons sometime from maybe the late 400s to early 500s, and possibly containing the figure who would later be identified as King Arthur. But as you can probably tell, most of the details in that last sentence are up for grabs, and yet the 1976 excavations did not find material to link Liddington to the Battle of Badon, but it did give us a solid chronology for the site, where both late Bronze Age and Iron Age are well represented. Now ducking back west for a bit, and Binknell Hill is a bit of an odd duck actually. For a while I was like, I probably just won't get around to it. I wasn't sure how to access it, or even if you could get through the fields around it. Well, I'm happy to say access is good and pretty straightforward. After getting to Liddington very early, I could then go and park beneath Binknell to the north. There's a small cluster of houses, not clear where you could park and not be getting on the locals' nerves, but I did my best, and it was before 7 a.m, so difficult to envisage causing a real issue at that time in the morning. And yeah, you just follow the signed footpath through the gates, up a gentle slope through some trees, and there you go. And you can see this was a great morning for it. Now, Binknell is a bit of a puzzling shape. I couldn't see an obvious reason in the terrain why it needs to be this odd sort of tapered wedge. Apparently, while it's believed this may have been Iron Age in origin, we're still not sure, and much of what you're seeing here is Norman work. This is a motte and bailey site where the path through the trees in the north is actually taking you past, or somewhat through, the motte. I must admit that had completely passed me by when I was there. Anyway, we're continuing to enjoy pretty great views over Swindon. We're actually doing a little loop around Swindon for the next few. To the west of the city, Ringsbury. Now, there is a footpath to the enclosure, but locals have made parking for this pretty impossible, so didn't get a chance to walk up to this one in the end. You can see it's a pretty nice bivalate enclosure just above the village of Purton. The eastern gateway has survived pretty well. There was an uninscribed gold coin found there, believed to be late Iron Age, but didn't give us much to work with. Then, taking a wide clockwise loop around Swindon to the north, this one took me by surprise. Castle Hill, while not exactly the most original name ever, is massive. The views are incredible and the ditches are substantial, particularly on the southern side. Perhaps most excitingly of all, in what was a hot day in a pretty dry summer, you can make out these features as crop marks. I'm assuming hut circles, though I can't be certain. A magnetometry survey done there in 2004 revealed several storage pits, and there's been some Iron Age pottery discovered to the south of the site. I'd like to say more, but there's not a lot of information available on this one, but it's well worth a visit. The farm there is trying its best to tell you you can't come in, except then you notice the public footpath just to the side there. Next, and I'd lost track that this was the next nearest. I thought this was ages away, but next long, and flicking from August to a cold February afternoon with some very beautiful snowdrops still sitting on the woodland floor, though we were having to avoid all the muddy patches, in the grounds of Ashdown House, this is Alfred's Castle. The ramparts don't survive particularly high. It's a plateau fort without really anything in the terrain to raise it up. The ramparts were cut in a rough hexagon in the early Iron Age, but there appears to be occupation on the site all the way to a villa site that was occupied until around the 200s AD. A couple of excavations there in the late 90s showed that this was made in a quite different fashion to the other forts nearby. They had several iterations of construction, from box rampart to dump rampart atop that. We unpacked this last time. Not to disappoint anyone, but links to Alfred seem to be purely anachronistic. While the Battle of Ashdown was believed to be somewhere near here in 871, linking Alfred to this site specifically appears to be a Victorian invention. Next, and a short way to the north, I think it was spring this time. Actually, I filmed there a couple of different times. There was definitely a cold evening in autumn where there was an icy wind beating against the edge of the hill. Uffington Castle. Now, once again, it's angular rather than the ditches curving gently. In fact, Just to draw attention to this a moment, we've said in this series that really no two hill forts are the same. They are massively diverse by pretty much every metric. I mean, most of all in use. I mean, anything from a busy proto-town that's substantially defended to maybe just a cattle corral. However, just occasionally you do see two or more in an area that show remarkable similarity in design and approach. And if we pull up the LiDAR for Ringsbury a moment, and now compare that to Uffington. I mean, even despite working with the contours of the terrain, I mean, come on, you can see how remarkably specific and similar these ideas are, from the rectilinear design on the gate side contrasted with the loose pentagon being formed by the other angles. I mean, sure, people could arrive at these ideas independently, but considering the proximity of these examples and others that are similar, I mean, Liddington is pretty close to this design too. Anyways, Uffington Castle has to share the hillside with one of Britain's most famous monuments and arguably its most important piece of prehistoric art. We briefly mentioned geoglyphs on this series, and nothing comes close to either the age or significance of Uffington. I'm going to have to resist the urge to get too drawn on this. I mean, not least because, of course, it's a huge enigma. There's even the suggestion that the horse might, in fact, be a dragon. We have this dating of between 1380 to 550 BC. I mean, it's quite a wide range, sure. This was arrived at by optically stimulated luminescence testing of some silt deposits. It is helpful that you can rule out other suggestions, for example, that it might have been Saxon. It leaves the possibility that it loosely overlaps the earliest phases of the Uffington enclosure, which have been dated to the latest Bronze Age. This originally had two entrances, but the one to the east was later blocked. Continuing along the high ground to the east, Sexbury. I had this in my head that this was really close to Swindon, but it's actually kind of a way over. Somewhat strikingly, it has a road running through the middle. Now, just a note on this. Far from being a symbol of the carelessness of modern society disregarding its ancient past, having a track running through a hill fort is almost standard practice. I mean, rather than hill forts always being a terminus, we often find that enclosures have trackways running through the centre, be it Hambledon or Barbary from earlier. Even the Romans did this, their roads would pass through their forts. So the idea that these trackways would have continued use into the medieval and one even being paved over in modern times, that's actually a perhaps surprising continuity rather than necessary an interruption of the site. I mean, yeah, sure, let's not make a habit of it, but you take my point. In the case of Sexbury specifically, an excavation from the late 90s suggested that the opening to the south may have been Iron Age and it was overlaid by a Roman trackway, but we're not completely confident of this. Sexbury is univalent, but the counterscarp is pretty considerable. We're getting a little further flung for the next few. It's not quite the tight concentration we have in the sort of northern extent of Wiltshire, and on a rather gloomy day in December we were passing by Perborough. And incidentally, this means we have just strayed into Berkshire. It took me doing this series to really consider Berkshire. Like, what is up with this? What even is this? Like, how did any of this come about? Well, anyway, Perborough Castle, not an especially known or celebrated site. I wasn't sure if there was any access up there, but it's being used for grazing. You can somewhat see the form of the ramparts lined by trees and bushes. It's had a lot of ploughing since the mid-20th century. The only entrance we know about is a possible one to the north. And then heading into Oxfordshire, a little bit to the north, Blueburton Hill. Now, you can see we flip back to August, a different August than before. This was a few years back now. You can see the fields are white and ready for harvest. Speaking of agriculture, we mentioned lynchets last episode, and before you get carried away, like, whoa, this hill has like 7 ditches and banks. These are lynchets. They're cut to cultivate the slopes. In this case, they're believed to be after the Iron Age, possibly early medieval. There's actually been quite a few excavations on the site. There were several seasons between 1947 to 1953, and then again in 1967, which is how we know the site began with a simple wooden palisade on the western side. This then developed into a box rampart from the 5 to 400s, and it was eventually abandoned around 100 BC. Heading north again, not too far, the Wittenham Clumps. I can never see this site without thinking of Hedley Thorne. A few years back, seems like he was up there almost every week. Massive big ups to Hedley Thorne and everyone on the Hillforts UK page. It turns out, occasionally good things can still take place on Facebook. There's a nice little community there. Well, not so little actually. But yes, it's always great to see people getting hyped about Hillforts, so big ups to everyone over there. So, Wittenham Clumps, also known as the Snodden Hills, but also known... Well, just bear in mind, few hill forts have simply one name, since in almost all cases their titles are exonyms. We don't have any sort of confirmed link to the name given them by their original builders. Now, sometimes there's a pretty trivial alternative such as Binknell Castle or Binknell Camp, not rocket science exactly, but in the case of the Wittenham Clumps, a name given to several hills, one of which is an Iron Age enclosure, their other name is... Mother Dunch's buttocks. Look, come on, people, what's wrong with you? Like, other than the fact the resemblance is completely lost on me, I mean, maybe you have to stand a particular spot, I don't know, but really. On a less juvenile note, the earliest enclosure on the site was a late Bronze Age circuit that was later developed into the Iron Age enclosure we see here. The Wyndham clumps are chalk rises above the Thames, just to the north, so it's not that surprising that these would be a prized location going way back, but we don't have time to cover all the history there. Moving on, and we just have time for one last one. If you try and drive to Cherbury via SatNav, you'll bump into one of a couple of entrances, basically just telling you to piss off. This is becoming a theme on this episode. Landowners who just really resent that there's a heritage site with some degree of access on or adjacent to their property, and try to be as unwelcoming and rude as possible about it. I later learned that there is an obscure path to Cherbury beginning in the north, which would have saved me some flight time. It doesn't allow you to enter the enclosure, but it passes alongside it. It's certainly a large, well-formed and well-preserved site. James Dye refers to this in his book as a valley fort. It's certainly not got a hill to lend it any prominence. The site potentially makes more sense if you consider the rivers in the area. Nowadays the landscape has been drained and it's pretty much just farmland. But if you consider the Thames flows to the north and the Och to the south, if you imagine the floodplains of these being a bit more extensive and somewhat different to their current course, you have to squint, but the site of the fort may make a little bit more sense. That's all for this week. I've got to keep some of these episodes concise. Next time we're heading to Somerset, and this is going to be one of the first in our big dip into the West Country, and after that we've got multiple vectors we need to attend to. The gloriously moody landscape of Shropshire is calling, but before then we've got to attend to what would have been the lands of the Dabuni, or possibly the Boduni. And also we can't leave out the forts of East Anglia. There is a lot left, is the theme here. And there's a lot more you can catch on the channel. As we mentioned, scroll back a bit and check out our Rome episodes, or better yet, just dive into the Italy playlist. I'm already getting impatient to finish the Hillforts series because we've got an incredible journey from early this year to Calabria, and I'm getting impatient to show that to everyone. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and if you want to catch it on bandcamp.com, that's one of the best ways you could support the channel. Also, follow us on Blue Sky, and we'll catch you very soon.